The young woman was already begging before Thaddeus Voss even knew what she was protecting.
"I beg you, don't do it."
Her voice shook. Her hands tightened around a stained cloth bundle pressed against her chest. Blood dripped from her sleeve onto the barn floor. And for the first time in years, Thaddeus felt something colder than fear move through his ranch. Because he had not spoken a single word to her yet. Summer heat hung over the Arizona territory. Outside, cicadas screamed in the dry grass. Inside the barn, everything felt wrong. Thaddeus had noticed it the moment he returned from checking the south pasture. The back barn door stood open. His old dog wasn't barking. It was whining. A strange horse waited behind the barn, still saddled, still sweating, as if someone had ridden hard to reach the ranch, then vanished. The heavy rancher removed his gray hat and listened. Nothing. No voices. No movement. Only the restless shifting of horses. His boots crunched across the straw. Then he spotted the blood. Not much. Just enough. A dark stain hidden beneath loose straw near the feed room. Someone had tried to cover it. Someone in a hurry. Thaddeus followed the trail. One step, then another. The barn seemed quieter with every yard he crossed. The smell reached him before the sight did. Blood, dust, fear. He moved around a stack of grain sacks and stopped. A young Apache woman sat in the shadows. Her face was pale. One arm was wrapped with a torn piece of cloth. Her breathing came fast and shallow. But her injury wasn't what caught his attention. It was the bundle. She held it tighter than a drowning person holds a rope, as if losing it would be worse than dying. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Thaddeus slowly crouched down. The woman watched him with frightened eyes. Not the eyes of a thief, not the eyes of a killer, the eyes of someone being hunted. Then he reached toward the bundle, and she recoiled. "I beg you, don't do it!" The words echoed through the barn. Outside, a horse suddenly snorted. A loose chain rattled against wood. And somewhere beyond the ranch fence, another rider was already coming. The wounded woman clearly believed that bundle was worth dying for. But what could possibly be hidden inside a piece of cloth that made powerful men willing to kill for it? The wounded woman clearly believed that bundle was worth dying for. But Thaddeus Voss had lived long enough to know something else. People rarely bled for money. They bled for family, for guilt, for promises they couldn't break. He slowly pulled his hand back. The fear in the young woman's face eased, but only a little. She still watched him like a cornered animal. That look wasn't new to him. Years earlier, he had seen the same look on people who expected betrayal before kindness. The memory left a bitter taste in his mouth. Without saying another word, he stood and crossed the barn. He grabbed a bucket of water. Then he set it several feet away from her, close enough to reach, far enough that she could choose. The woman stared at him. He did the same with a small piece of bread from his saddlebag. Then he returned to an empty crate and sat down. Not too close, just close enough to show he wasn't leaving. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a warm breeze pushed through the open barn door. The strange horse shifted its weight and snorted. Finally, the young woman reached for the water. Her hands trembled. She drank carefully, as if even water had become something she could no longer trust. "My name is Thaddeus," he said. The woman lowered the bucket. "Tansy." It wasn't much, but it was a start. The old rancher glanced toward the bundle. "You came a long way carrying that thing." Tansy's eyes immediately hardened again. The reaction told him everything. Whatever was inside mattered more than her wound, more than her exhaustion, maybe even more than her own life. A few minutes later, while cleaning the injury on her arm, Thaddeus noticed something strange. The wound wasn't fresh. Neither were the scratches on her hands. She had been running for days, maybe longer. No ordinary thief could stay ahead of a horse posse that long. No ordinary thief would even try. When he quietly asked who was chasing her, Tansy looked toward the barn door, then toward the bundle. Only then did she answer. "My brother died because of what's inside." Tansy's fingers tightened around the bundle. "He told me not to let anyone touch it." Her voice dropped even lower. "He said if the wrong men got this paper, they'd kill me too." The words hung in the air, heavy, cold, final. Even the horses seemed quieter after that. Thaddeus said nothing. He simply waited. And after a long silence, Tansy finally revealed the reason she had come to his ranch. A dying man had given her one last instruction: find the rancher with the yellow bandana. What she said next would explain why men were hunting her across Arizona. Tansy sat quietly for a moment, staring at the bundle in her lap. The afternoon sun slipped through the cracks in the barn wall and painted thin lines across the straw. For a few seconds, she seemed somewhere else. Then she finally spoke. What she said next made more sense of the blood than anything Thaddeus had seen that day. Her brother had worked as a guide near Tucson. He spoke enough English to deal with ranchers, soldiers, and clerks. He carried messages, led travelers through rough country, and knew which men in town were honest. That kind of work didn't make a man rich, but it taught him where secrets like to hide. A few weeks earlier, he had stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Then he realized it was theft. Not the kind that happened with a gun, the kind that happened with paper, a forged water rights document. One signature, one official seal. And hundreds of acres could change hands without a single shot being fired. Tansy explained that the document connected a powerful cattle boss named Byron Ketchum to Deputy Eli Bauer. The two men were quietly trying to gain control of a water ditch south of Tucson. Most people in town wouldn't think much about a ditch, but ranchers understood. Water wasn't just water. Water was grass. Water was cattle. Water was survival. And in Arizona, men had killed for a lot less. Take away the water and small ranchers wouldn't last a season. Sooner or later they would sell. And Byron would buy. Cheap. Thaddeus listened without interrupting. The older he got, the less he trusted stories that sounded too simple. Unfortunately, this one sounded exactly like something powerful men would do. Tansy's brother planned to bring the document to town. He never made it. 2 days later, they found his horse wandering alone. The rider never came home. The young woman's voice cracked for the first time. It wasn't fear. It was grief. Before he died, her brother had hidden the document inside the cloth bundle. Then he gave her one final instruction. Find the rancher with the yellow bandana. That part bothered Thaddeus. He had never met the man. At least, not that he could remember. So how had a stranger known his name? Before we go any further, settle into your chair, take a slow breath, and stay on this trail with us. Tell me where you're listening from, and what you would have done if a wounded stranger came to your barn with a secret like this. If you're enjoying the story, please like and subscribe, because a little kindness can still be a man's strongest proof of character. As it turned out, that lesson was about to be tested sooner than either of them expected. Thaddeus looked down at the yellow bandana hanging around his neck. The cloth suddenly felt heavier than it had that morning. Then a sound echoed from outside. A horse. Not leaving. Arriving. And whoever was riding toward the ranch already knew exactly where to look. The sound grew louder with every passing second. Hooves struck the hard ground outside the barn. Then another horse joined them. And another. Thaddeus slowly rose from the crate. He didn't rush. Men his age learned long ago that panic rarely improved a situation. But he was paying attention now. Very close attention. Tansy heard the riders too. The color drained from her face. Without thinking, she pulled the cloth bundle tighter against her chest. That reaction told Thaddeus more than any explanation could. These weren't neighbors stopping by for coffee. These were the men she had been running from. The old rancher stepped to the barn entrance and looked outside. 3 riders were approaching through the dust. One of them wore a badge. Even from a distance, he recognized Deputy Eli Bauer. The deputy sat comfortably in his saddle, as if he owned the road leading to the ranch. The 2 men riding beside him looked less official. Hard faces, hard eyes. The kind of men who smiled only when someone else was having a bad day. Thaddeus quietly closed the barn door halfway before returning to Tansy. "Stay here," he said. She looked up. "You can't trust them." I already figured that out. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she almost smiled. Almost. Outside, saddle leather creaked. A moment later came the sharp knock of a boot against the porch steps. Then another. Then silence. The kind of silence that usually arrives right before trouble. Thaddeus stepped out of the barn and started toward the house. The deputy was waiting near the water trough. His smile appeared friendly enough. His eyes did not. "Afternoon, Thaddeus." "Afternoon." Deputy Bauer glanced toward the barn. "We're tracking an Apache horse thief." The words came too quickly, almost rehearsed. The deputy continued speaking. Said she was dangerous. Said she'd stolen livestock. Said several ranchers had already filed complaints. It sounded neat. Too neat. As the deputy talked, Thaddeus noticed something interesting. One of the riders kept looking toward the barn. Not the horse tied outside. Not the ranch house. The barn. Specifically, the barn. Like he was searching for something. Or someone. Deputy Bauer finally got to the point. "If she's here, hand her over. We'll take care of the rest." The old rancher stared at him for a long moment. Years ago, he probably would have believed a badge without question. Years ago, he would have stepped aside. Not anymore. Because something about this visit felt wrong. And deep down, he already knew the deputy wasn't looking for a thief. He was looking for whatever was hidden inside that bundle. Then one of the riders suddenly swung out of his saddle and started walking toward the barn door. And that was when the situation stopped being a conversation. "Hold up," Thaddeus said. The rider kept walking. Maybe he thought the old rancher was bluffing. Maybe he thought age had made him soft. He was wrong. The rider grabbed the barn handle. Thaddeus stepped forward and drove one hard shove into his chest. The man stumbled backward and crashed into the water trough. Water splashed everywhere. One of the other riders jumped down from his horse. For a second, it looked like the whole yard might explode. Instead, Thaddeus picked up a shovel and planted its blade in the dirt. Not a threat. A line. Nobody crossed it. Nobody spoke. The deputy studied the old rancher for several long seconds. He wasn't afraid of Thaddeus. He was afraid of making a public mess before the warrant was ready. Then he shook his head. "Mount up." The riders backed away. Slowly. But not one of them looked disappointed. That bothered Thaddeus more than the fight. It meant they already had another plan. Before leaving, Deputy Bauer pointed toward the barn. "This isn't over." That wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and everyone knew it. The dust from the departing horses had barely settled before Thaddeus walked back into the barn. Tansy was still sitting where he'd left her, still holding the bundle, still carrying more grief than anyone her age should have to carry. The old rancher sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Sometimes silence does a better job than words. As evening settled over the ranch, Tansy lifted the bundle with shaking hands. For a moment, Thaddeus thought she might pull it back. Then she finally handed it to him. Not because she trusted the world, not because she trusted the law, because she had decided to trust him. Carefully, Thaddeus opened the cloth. Inside was the document her brother had died protecting. One sheet of paper. That was all. No gold. No treasure. Just ink, signatures, and a seal. Funny thing is, some of the most dangerous weapons in history have never fired a bullet. The old rancher studied the document for several minutes. Then he looked up. Tansy pointed to a small note folded behind the document. Thaddeus unfolded it. Only a few words were written there. If anything happens to me, find the rancher with the yellow bandana. He stared at the handwriting. Then he remembered. 3 years earlier, he had helped a stranded traveler repair a broken wagon south of Tucson. The traveler had been Tansy's brother. Neither of them had known the other man's name, but he had remembered the yellow bandana. For the first time all day, Thaddeus understood why men were willing to kill for that bundle. "We'd take this to Tucson." Fear flashed across Tansy's face. She knew what that meant. No more hiding. No more running. The truth would have to stand in front of everyone, and truth often makes powerful people nervous. By sunrise, they would either expose powerful men in Tucson or disappear before the week was over. Not because they were stronger than the people chasing them. Not because they had more money or more influence. Because they had something those men didn't. They had the truth. Now, I don't know about you, but that's one thing I've noticed over the years. A lie can travel fast. Money can buy time. Power can silence people for a while. But the truth has a stubborn way of surviving when even one decent person refuses to let it die. And sometimes the person who changes everything isn't a hero. It's just an ordinary man who finally decides he's done looking the other way. As darkness settled over the Arizona desert, a lonely ranch no longer felt quite so lonely. But somewhere beyond the hills, other men were already making plans. And by the time the people of Tucson learned the truth, nobody would ever look at Byron Ketchum the same way again.